Hi guys, welcome to the latest podcast of Yarn and Black. So I've got a really great friend of mine on, but first I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on. I'm here in Baldwin Kew on the land of the Durri people, and I want to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. But my guest today is Gerald Hoskins. How are you?
Good, thanks, AJ. Yeah, going well. Thank you, brother.
Nice to meet you. Nice to catch up with you. I know you've been really busy, so to get you on's been a little bit hard, but now we've got you on. So welcome.
Yeah.
But just give our audience a little bit of who you are, where you're from.
I come from a place called Kempsey on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. I'm a Dungutty man, very strong and proud history of supporting my community. I have worked in nursing, in the military, lately in the mental health sector, very strongly since the loss of both my brother and our eldest son to suicide. So that sort of put me into this sort of theatre, I guess I'll call it, where I do a fair bit of education and support work around suicide prevention. Particularly my communities on the mid-north coast. So that's where that's where I'm at the moment. So yeah, it's a great honour to be here. I'm coming to you from the lands of Gadigal people here in Sydney. So a place called Parramatta. So yeah, anyway.
Nice, thanks. So you grew up in Kempsey?
Yeah, early years I grew up in a place called Rutherford, which is near Maitland in Newcastle, in New South Wales. Yeah, and we were going home nearly every weekend. So keep in touch with family. Both my mum and dad are from Kempsey. But yeah, dad sort of grew up in or worked in Newcastle for a large electricity company down there. So just sort of they were early years, and then finally moved home around 1986. Went on to finish HSC in '89. So it was. I met the mother of my children in '86 when I got up there. So we had 4 beautiful children together, and we also have a couple of kids that are in care that are with us, and so they're a large part of our family as well. So yeah.
So what made you do nursing? What attracted you to nursing?
Very interesting story. I was waiting to go off to the police force, and the CEO of our Aboriginal Medical Service at that time had asked me whether or not I'd be interested in doing some volunteer driving and taking elders and uncles and aunties to doctor's appointments. And I said, "Oh yeah, okay. I'm not doing anything. I can do that." And ended up doing that, and then going on to doing a Aboriginal health workers course. And my thirst for knowledge, I had a really good mentor at that time. She's one of my cousins, and she was a registered nurse, and she was like, you're better off being a nurse, like if you want to help out people, and here's the reasons why. And ended up going on doing nursing. So she's remains a very strong influence in my life as well, even right up to this time. So and I'm very, very glad that she saw in me what I couldn't at that time, and she said, "You'd be a good nurse." So I spent some time in accident emergency nursing, community general, so at a place called Narrabri in New South Wales, out west. Went on to do audiometry as well, so which was quite an eye-opener for me. The number of our kids with otitis media or bulimia at that time was quite high. So I enjoyed that. I ended up leaving nursing to go on and do a health management degree with Australian College of Health Service Executives out of New South Wales. So and that sort of kicked off my health management sort of career pathway. Being able to sit there as both an Aboriginal person with an Aboriginal health qualification, but also then with a health management qualification as well, to be able to have those conversations and change the narrative on the way we do business around Aboriginal health in New South Wales. Yeah.
So I know when I did nursing, and I'm just going to ask you, I learned nothing about working with Aboriginal people while I did my nursing course. When you did nursing, did
No,
you
no.
anything at all?
I I experienced the same. I actually was quite humbled that there were a lot of questions from my colleagues about how's this in the Aboriginal community, and I would always ask questions, and I still do today of my lecturers. Can you give us an example of where that's happened with Aboriginal people, just to test their theory and knowledge of what's currently happening with Aboriginal people when it comes to the healthcare. So yeah, I still sort of ask those questions. And yeah, we would end up having a conversation and railroading the conversation. And I actually found a lot of colleagues were quite eager to find out what was actually happening in Aboriginal health and why it was so poor. Yeah, because they obviously had a different narrative on why. So yeah, we would then have that conversation about why it's the way it is now. So yeah,
Um, one of the buzzwords that's around at the moment is reconciliation. What does
I
reconciliation mean to you?
uh, I I know you and I are both educated in safety stuff, and I am quite aware that some people feel responsible for what's happened in the past, particularly a lot of people in society. But the reality is, to allow the truth to be told, it's not a very how do I put it? It's not a very savoury sort of truth that we have in Australia. Our at the end of the day, our country was built on mistruths, and just to hear the other side of the story. And I hope that a lot of Australians are willing to always hear both sides of the story to allow them to make a decision about what they actually want to do. So yeah, um, yeah. I guess sort of reconciliation for me is that process, of understanding. I I've been involved in a lot of RATs over the years, university, in corporate life, etc. And I have always asked the question of the organisation, what is it that you want, like our employees and our customers, our clientele, to know about what reconciliation is in Australia. In university, that was one of the things that I asked of my university was, what is it that you want all of our students to know as part of their journey here in reconciliation, and how will you teach that effectively so they can ask questions and seek knowledge, to seek the truth about our sort of tainted history of Australia. And like we're strong enough and we're big enough and we're proud enough as a nation to move forward when it comes to reconciliation. But it was always a process that was not an Aboriginal process to begin with. It's like, okay, tell us what you want. It's always been the non-Aboriginal communities that have asked those questions. So yeah, and I guess also we're not always prepared for that sort of open dialogue as well. So yeah, but that's reconciliation for me.
Do you think Australia is ready for truth telling?
I think there are the change, the thirst for knowledge with our younger generations is there. I feel that a lot of people are willing to accept um, that there are alternate stories to what happened in Australia. Um, I think that the level of education that exists around those conversations, policies have changed, but the outcomes have sort of not really changed. The wording, the inclusion of policies to define the alternate history, the Aboriginal history of Australia, has come into policies. One of the bigger things is like I've been involved in the foster care system for around 25 years now, and I've watched it become a black economy, um, where we still have the removal of children from their homes, and the difference for me is that we actually have Aboriginal people involved in the removal process now, and so that seems to veto the cultural safety of that process. while the trauma still remains, we don't do a lot in terms of, for me, I don't see a lot of restoration of Aboriginal children back to their families, and that's one thing that really concerns me, is that we work on the child, but we actually don't work on the family unit, to be able to get them back into where they need to go. And there's many reasons for why that happens, and while I'm sad, I just come now to accept that's the reality for a lot of Aboriginal communities is, our children will continue to be removed, despite the apology, despite the acknowledgement that it's not a good process. We still do it, and I understand the safety of children. I get all that. I'm the first to defend children, and to keep them safe. And I just sometimes have to question the way we do it. Yeah.
You're also a mental health first aid instructor. What made you
Yep.
decide to do MHFA?
Well, that's a great question, and I do get asked this a fair bit. So when I do my introductions, when I train, I train in Aboriginal mental health first aid and youth. I was the youth instructor for quite some time and was quite fortunate to have great mentor, still mentors me today. Her name's Kate Riddell, and she comes from down in Melbourne. I was quite hesitant to become an educator in this realm, because I was always concerned about the trauma, the repeating of the trauma after losing my brother and our son to suicide. I actually say they died from anxiety and depression, and they couldn't stay. And I became an educator because of their stories, and it was a way for me to feel like I was helping save the brothers and the sons that I couldn't at that time. And I actually enjoy telling their stories. It's like their memories are alive, and I get to tell their stories as well. And that allows me to grieve for them and to remember them. I always have this really deep sort of fear that I will lose, that I'll forget them, that I'll lose their memory. And as time goes on and grief happens, that sometimes happens, and there are days where I have felt guilty that I didn't think of them for the day. And so I became an educator to be able to support people to become eyes and ears, particularly in my community. I do a fair bit of training with the university centre, the country university centres where I am, to have this conversation safely, so that we've got more eyes and ears in the community to be able to look out, and hopefully people will just be like, okay, that doesn't make sense to me. I'm going to actually ask the question, are you okay? Are you safe? Yeah, that's why I do what I do.
What do you see most in community when they do help their day? You see that recognition of...
I'm sorry. Yeah, I currently in my community, we have so much heartache, and trauma sort of arising from suicide. I had a conversation last night with some very senior people in my community. The place I come from, Kempsey, has had the highest attempt rate in New South Wales for young people under 25, and it's sort of that trend is still, it has moments in my community. Our young people are our future, and sort of this is both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, but most of the attempts have been from Aboriginal kids. So we're, as an uncle now, as an older person in my community, I feel I have some cultural responsibility to be able to try and arrest those rates, which is another reason why I'm a trainer. I feel every little bit helps, every little class that we run, every time we have a conversation with someone, it's a good process to be having. And I'm a good yarn teller as well. So I'm quite proud of my gift to be able to support people to be better humans, and that's not just being Aboriginal people. That's just being better people all over. So, yeah.
Now, you mentioned cultural safety before. What makes you feel culturally safe when you go to a service or an organisation?
I guess for me is just the recognition. Um, I have always had a bit of a mantra, and I look for that mantra at some level, and that is that I treat people the way I expect my mum and my dad and my brothers and sisters to be treated, and my sons and daughters to be treated. And if an organisation displays that same sort of um, mantra, then I feel culturally safe. Um, it's not just about signage; it's about actually displaying the values that support families, that support just good relationships. So,
What are some stereotypes that you still hear about our culture, maybe in trainings to start off with before you get into the actual workshop for them to walk out with?
yeah, look, um, there's been some really funny ones, and they're quite challenging because you're just like, in the day and age of Google, of Facebook, even though it doesn't have all the good correct information, people still are afraid to um, pick up their phone or their devices and Google to actually find out if that's a fact or fiction. You know, I I was quite disappointed, um, but but satisfied that Australia, as part of the referendum, had the last referendum that we had. Um, there was no real information out there, and people were afraid to actually pick up their devices and do it. I sort of some of the ones that I still come across, despite this day and age, is that Aboriginal people have a lot of cars. I don't have a lot of cars. That we make one payment and then we own the car. That we get free housing. Yeah, look, I've heard them all. None of them actually phase me anymore. I'm quite desensitized to the conversation, but it's like, do you know many Aboriginal people that have that? Have you Googled that? Have you had the conversations with people to find out whether that's true or not? So yeah, I just sort of yeah, yeah. But
If I gave $1 million or $1 zillion and a magic wand, and you could fix something in Aboriginal affairs, what would you choose?
I I think um, it would be policy development. So the way our policies are developed, the lack of consultation. But there's consultation that happens, but it's not real effective face to face. Like, and I say cold face sort of conversations. Like, we don't seek out people on the ground and have these conversations and say, how does this affect you directly as an Aboriginal person living in Australia right now? This policy on social housing, how does that affect you? This policy on education for our kids, how does that affect you? We don't seem to have the conversations at the levels that are required. So, in terms of that, magic wand stuff, policy development, more interaction. I know the consultation process will take longer, but it'll actually be a better policy overall if we're able to have those conversations. And I always go back to probably one of the most important pieces of legislation that happened in New South Wales was the Child and Young Persons Act in 1997, I think it was, that came out. And that was the ability for adults to supervise and discipline their children. For a culture that comes from a village sort of to grow a child sort of process, that automatically excluded uncles and aunties and other caregivers in our community, people that were able to support young children, were no longer able to support children because the threats were made: if you come anywhere near me, if you touch me, I'll get the police involved. And the police, just sort of, it rendered our Aboriginal communities powerless. And as a result of that, look at what we have now. I don't know what it's like down your way, but in New South Wales, like, there's no law discipline, LORE discipline. no sort of cultural support can directly happen to a lot of our young people, and they need it. They need it, and yeah, it's sort of. I always have this conversation with older people, and they're like, I wish we had this in our community and this, and I'm like, the community and days that we grew up in, the environments, no longer exist. Yeah, and sort of, um, you know, I'm not sure what way is ahead for our younger people, but they're lost, and there's no people that are willing to guide them anymore. So, yeah. And a lot of the stuff that we do with them is now reactive rather than proactive. So, yeah.
And
That's
you
that
would
policy
see, because
development stuff again, like services and funded. Sorry?
I was just going to ask you that there's a lot of kids that I've been working with lately that don't know which community they actually belong to. I mean, they embrace their Aboriginality community they go to. What advice do you give those kids who want to know more but don't even know where to start looking?
We face the same thing up where I am. So I sort of take on an uncle role with those ones, and then I say, where do you think you come from? How would you want to have contact back with that community? And then I put them in touch with people that I know and say, I've got this young fella here, and this is what they're looking to do. They say they come from out your way. I also give them advice in terms of, that we have some Aboriginal agencies that are able to support kids. I love doing family tree, doing the genetic sort of stuff with kids, sitting down doing that, helping them find out where they actually come from. A lot of experience over the last 25 years working with kids in care. Helping them find out who they actually are. A lot of kids are off country. That off country sickness as well. That affects their mental health or their social emotional well-being is a huge part for me, and I sort of attack it from that angle of, let's get you back to the country somewhere if that's a visit. Yeah, and there have been times when I've driven kids to back home to where they come from and had those conversations in the community and said, this fellow comes from here, and yeah, the communities are always ready to embrace. Part of the cultural safety stuff that I have always done, and particularly when I do the cultural education stuff, has always been around our Aboriginal kids. They could have, a percentage. If you were to ever go to a percentage, how offensive that might be, no matter how much Aboriginal blood they have in their system, our Aboriginal communities will always embrace those kids. It's the non-Aboriginal community that sort of don't embrace the kids, and so we've come a long way with our stolen generation stuff. I'm quite fortunate where I am to have the wisdom elders, education and experience and guidance from the Kitchener. That was quite harrowing. So it always serves as a reminder to me of how lost our kids can actually be. And my job is to help hold their hand through the darkness, through the fog, so they can get somewhere safe to be able to find out who they are and where they come from. I'm yet to come to a dead end with any of the kids. There's always other people in communities that are willing to support kids as well. I think that just goes to show the strength and resilience of our Aboriginal communities, despite all the trauma that goes on, despite all the disadvantage, despite all the disruption. There's always something. There's always someone in the community, and usually a number of people that are willing to grab those kids by the hand and take them to where they need to go. So,
What makes a good leader in community?
I was quite fortunate my generation to have uncles and aunties around that demonstrated that leadership in terms of law, maintaining law, LORE, this cultural safety. It was always about responsibility and respect, having justice, having people to guide me. I think a lot of those elements are still in our communities, except they're just a little bit more hidden than normal. And I also think that the the death rates of older Aboriginal Australians as well has played a huge role in that, where they've taken that information with them to the ground, into the ground, and the ability of us now as leaders is always to maintain identity. If we know who we are and where we come from, I feel that'll always give somebody a grounding, to the ability to connect back to their country, to have an identity, know where they come from, which is why it's so very important for our kids in care to know that they are valued, that they actually have a connection. We just need to connect them to back to their country, and all the rest will sort of happen from there for them. So, that's what leadership is to me. It's about connection and being a connector, and also staying connected as well. I feel that's important.
I've got. I'm just watching the time. I've got 2 questions for you, and that one question is, what's one thing that people might not know about you? You don't normally tell people, but you will on the podcast here.
I guess that is that I may come across as a very strong, powerful, resilient person, that has all the answers. But there are a lot of times that I spend doubting myself. There are a lot of times I have doubts about who I am and what I'm doing. I cry a fair bit for families, for my son, for my brother, for my children, for the mother of my children. I cry, and I think that's good for me. I never used to be a crier. I was always a hold it in sort of person, and had this sort of macho view. My years in the military also taught me that, and um, I am complete now. I wasn't allowed to be complete before, but now I am. So that's probably one thing that people don't know about me, that I cry too. So yeah.
You mentioned the military, and I was going to ask you that before, but what was it like being in the military?
Oh, I sort of, back in the early 90s, one of my mates wanted to join the Army Reserve, and so I had a license, and I drove him down to the place, and the corporal at the time had sort of encouraged me by signing his papers that I'd signed my own papers to go away, and it was really good. At that time, many of my brothers, my cousins, they're more brothers, were going to jail at that time. So I was either go to the army or go to jail. I guess I was eventually going to get caught up in the same circle as them, and I chose the army, and I'm grateful for that. It gave me discipline. It gave me view. It allowed me to travel Australia and overseas. It allowed me to, experience a high level of bonding with people that is far greater than any sort of friendship relationship I could have back in civilian life. I maintain a lot of those relationships to this day. There's still a lot of PTSD sort of stuff that comes with that territory. I've lost a fair few of my comrades to suicide. They just couldn't stay. They just couldn't fit in when they came back. AJ, the army life is so bonding, and those bonds are so strong that you search for them in civilian life and you can't find them. I was quite fortunate to have very strong family and community to go back to, where the love was very similar. And I was sort of, I was able to stay, and yeah, if that makes sense. But very different in the military. Discrimination was, there's only one skin, and that was the green skin. And it was on your ability to be able to do stuff. So yeah, it was a little bit different. It doesn't mean I didn't face any sort of racism when I was in there. There were one or two. There's like in every organisation, there's one or two that just didn't get the message. they got dealt with, of course. But yeah, that didn't discourage me in any way though from staying as long as I did in the military. So um, I I didn't want any of that for my children. However, my second eldest son, the twin brother of the boy that we lost, he's in the military now, and he's great. He reminds me so much of a young me. Yeah, and I'm very proud of him, as I am of of all of our sort of soldiers, our military personnel, regardless of what they're doing. It's an experience, and I sort of one of the things later on for me was that I had to acknowledge that the military was not always a supportive process or organisation for Aboriginal people, particularly those that had served overseas. The Anzac stuff, the non-recording of Aboriginal people on cenotaphs after they died, all that sort of stuff. We've still got a long way to go, but we're getting there. And the military, um, I'm still involved with a lot of people, so I'm very proud to say that I was in the military, and I support people even to this day if they want to go that way. So, yeah.
You know how much I support you. And, I want to say thank you for joining us today. But what's one message?
Thank you.
What's one message you want people to walk away with?
That it's okay to be worried about people that you love and care for. It's okay to be worried about Australia. It's perfectly okay to put your hand up and say, I'm not okay today, but I'm getting there and I'll be better tomorrow. And that's me. I sort of do that when I don't always have the best days, but I always say to people, tomorrow's a new day and let's take it on the chin and we'll be there tomorrow. So we'll be there tomorrow.
And we will be here tomorrow. That's definitely for sure.
Well, thank you, AJ.
Thank you for joining us. Hey, guys, I'll see you in the next podcast. Thanks, Heath.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.